The University of Kentucky recently had an RA training session. Actually, let me rephrase that. They had two separate RA training sessions, one for people of color and one for racist, evil white people. And yes, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that actually did happen. You see, the University of Kentucky segregated white students into a white accountability space. That is actually a thing that happened. And I was under the impression that segregation was a bad thing, but I guess it's acceptable here if the UK does it. I'm not entirely sure. This comes to us from YAF, where they have this leaked email talking about these training sessions. Specifically, it said there was one training session for RAs who identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, and another for RAs who identify as white. And that if you are a white RA, you are expected to look at the attached document about white accountability space. And you are supposed to be familiar and presumably agree with that document. Now, before we look at this white accountability space, I do want to point out that one of the leaders or trainers of this session was someone named Brandon Colbert, who you're not familiar with, I'm not familiar with, but YAF looked at his Twitter and found this fairly ridiculous Twitter thread, where he said, all the stuff people tend to love about America is the stuff that makes it racist, including the national anthem, Columbus Day, Independence Day, the police, and the American flag. Now, first off, I don't know how many people would say they actually love Columbus Day. I mean, it's kind of just another holiday. It doesn't really have the same level of affection that Christmas or Halloween does, but that's beside the point. The American flag, the police, these are not racist things. Just because someone claims they are doesn't make it the case. But now, let's look at this document on white accountability spaces. It's titled Common Racist Behaviors and Attitudes of White People, and it includes a list of 41 things that apparently white people do that are racist. I'm not going to go over all of them because 41 items is a fairly long list, but feel free to read all of them if you want to. The source is down below in the description. I'm just going to read about 10 of them and show how absurd it is that the University of Kentucky is pushing forward propaganda, because that's literally what this is. Let's start with number 1. White people believe they have earned what they have, rather than acknowledge the extensive white privilege and unearned advantages they receive. So, I'm white, so that means I must have white privilege. The white privilege that allowed me to grow up in a single-parent home, living off of government housing, relying on food stamps, being the first person in my immediate family to graduate college. And now, I'm actually working on a graduate degree. All of that is because of white privilege. It has nothing to do with the fact that I worked hard and I worked for it. I didn't earn any of it. It was given to me, apparently. And if you're white, you're just given things too. That's how white privilege works. Not notice the daily indignities that people of color experience, deny them, and rationalize them away with perfectly logical explanations. So, being logical is not acceptable. That's also being racist. Now, obviously, there are differences if you're white or if you're Black, and your experience is going to be different. But to claim that people are doing right now that being Black in America is like a death sentence, or every day they wake up scared for their lives, yeah, that's kind of ridiculous. And if that's the daily indignity that people of color experience, well, I don't agree with that. It's not logical. Interrupt and talk over people of color. Now, most of the time, you shouldn't interrupt people because it's rude, but occasionally it is warranted. But apparently, if you're white and they're Black or a person of color, you're only doing it because you're a racist. Focus on their, quote, good intentions as whites, rather than on the negative impact of their behavior. And this is essentially straight out of White Fragility, where she argues that impact is more important than intention. That it doesn't really matter what you meant to do. If someone was impacted negatively or had a negative connotation or something, then you are at fault and you should apologize. But that's not how it works. My intentions are very important. I can say literally anything and someone will get offended. That's not on me, that's on them. If I call a group of people guys and one of them is a girl, if she gets upset at me because of the patriarchy and misogyny and all of those things, that's not really my fault, that's kind of on her. She decided to get upset over something that was really absurd. Segregate themselves from people of color and rarely develop authentic relationships across race. Now this one is fairly ironic because they're teaching you as white people not to segregate yourselves in a segregated environment that they forced you to participate in. So they're saying you can't segregate yourselves from people of color, but at the same time, here's a white people space for white accountability, and you can't be part of the Black people space. That's absurd. You can't segregate yourselves, but if UK does it, well, that's acceptable. Fear they will be seen and found out as a racist, having racial prejudice. So being concerned that someone is going to accuse you of racism without any real evidence, if you're scared of that, well, that's just because you are a racist. Focus on themselves as individual. I'm not racist, I'm a good white. And refuse to acknowledge the cultural and institutional racism people of color experience daily. So once again, we're back to the experience of people of color. And that if you don't accept that institutions as a whole are racist, or that virtually every institution is racist, as Robin DiAngelo and Ibram Kendi put it, then you are a racist. If you don't recognize that you are complicit in white supremacy, then you're racist. If you do recognize it, well, then you're still racist. So there's really no win. Pressure and punish whites who actively work to dismantle racism, to conform and collude with white racism. Once again, if I'm criticizing people like Robin DiAngelo, who is a white who I guess tries to end racism by being an idiot, well, that's just me being more racist. Even though she says things that make absolutely no sense, and you can check out my video about white fragility if you want to. Ask people of color to repeat what they have just said. Now, sometimes if someone's speaking, it sounds like gibberish. I know I'm not the only one who's experienced this. It happens. And occasionally you have to ask them 2 or 3 times to repeat themselves, and it's a really awkward situation. But I suppose if that happens, you're white and they're a person of color, well, you're just inherently racist. It can't have anything to do with the fact that maybe you just didn't hear them. You know, that can't happen. Your white ears just didn't want to listen. If confronted by a person of color, view it as an attack and focus on the critique how they engaged, not the original racist comments or behaviors. Once again, this is saying that if you're confronted by a person of color, there's no question that the behaviors you had were in fact racist. It could not be that it was taken out of context, they misinterpreted it, or they were impacted in a way that you didn't intend. All of that is irrelevant because if you're white and they're a person of color, you were racist if they confront you about it. It doesn't matter what they thought. It doesn't matter if you had an American flag and they viewed that as racist. You were wrong, you were racist. That's it. Which is obviously nonsense. But that's not stopping people or groups of people like UK from pushing this forward. Now, this entire list, all 41 of them, is brought to you by someone called Kathy Obear, who wrote a book called But I'm Not a Racist: Tools for Well-Meaning Whites to Dismantle Racism. So she seems to be in the same vein as people like Robin DiAngelo, a white person who is getting rich off of talking about how racist other white people are. Which is a little bit ironic. If you want an example of white privilege, it's right there. White people getting rich by talking about racism, that's the example of white privilege if I ever saw one. And it's really ironic to me that just a few weeks ago, President Trump was being attacked and criticized for talking about critical race theory, saying that it shouldn't be taught in schools or in government institutions or things like that. And people were saying, that's not happening, critical race theory, that doesn't exist, no one's talking about things like that. But we just saw, right now, a clear example of critical race theory, saying that white people are in fact racist. They are complicit in and they collude with some white supremacist system. That is critical race theory. And it's literally being taught in a university. So it looks like President Trump was right. Critical race theory has no place in a public university funded by the government. It shouldn't be there. This program should not have happened. But I suppose we can continue to pretend this doesn't exist and that schools are not teaching it, even though they very clearly are because we literally just saw it. As always, thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe, hit the like, and leave a comment, and I'll see you next time.